So this is another lecture on Romans. I think it's our 12th, if I'm not mistaken. The part that we're going to look at, just to review, is Romans 8, which to me is the high point of the letter, where Paul will use this term Spirit 17 times, and it represents the culmination of all of the household metaphors that Paul has used in previous chapters. And the metaphors are serving to show that Jews and Gentiles alike are welcome to God's table in the community of faith. We talked that Julius Caesar adopts Augustus posthumously. That is, when Julius Caesar dies and when his will is read, it's discovered that he has adopted Augustus Caesar as his heir. Now, Julius did have a natural-born son. His name was Caesarion, and he was the son of Caesar and Cleopatra. And so it's not like Caesar did not have a natural-born son, but it was to say that Octavian, which was his nephew, was a more suitable choice. Adoption in the Roman world was not as prevalent as may appear. However, it did serve both in the Greek and the Roman world as a sort of social security. And what would happen is that an older couple that would be looking to, or maybe not a couple, maybe it's just one who's left, needed someone to care for them, and their own children either a disappointment, incompetent, or had died off, or had not been born, that person would need someone to give care. And so what they would do is they would adopt a person, a son, and that son would be forced, if they went along with the scheme, at least in the Latin understanding, that is in Rome, to take on the family name of the one who's adopting them, to exchange the deities for the deities of the adoptive parent, and then to care for the parent in the parent's old age, and then as a requisite or as a payoff, when that parent died, the estate would pass into the hands of the one who'd been adopted. So, socially, there were some benefits to adoption. Socially, it kept people cared for. There were also some benefits in terms of religious things, and that is that the adoptive parent would pass on the family spirit to someone else, lest that family spirit die as well. And so religiously, this has significance. So when Octavian is adopted by Julius, Octavian exchanges his own father's name. Now, his own father had died, but he exchanges his own father's name for that of Caesar, Julius. He inherits the family deities, so the Genius of the Caesari, and he inherits all the fortune as well. As a side note, Mark Antony, of course, sees the 19-year-old Octavian and decides that he's too young to receive all of this, and he sequesters the fortune of Octavian, and Octavian doesn't forgive him for this. And after Octavian works with Mark Antony to avenge Julius's death in Philippi, Octavian turns his attention to Mark Antony, and at Actium, the final battle, Antony is defeated. He commits suicide, and then Augustus moves on to Egypt, where it, depending on how you look at history, whether Cleopatra takes her own life or whether she is dispatched, and of course Caesarion is killed as well. Mark Antony and Cleopatra had made an alliance, and there were 2 children from that alliance. Those 2 children were also killed, and Octavian consolidates his power, and he gets his fortune back, and he lives out his life, and he does his thing, but he has no male either. The two, his grandsons, who were born to Julia, his daughter, he wants to pass his auctoritas, his authority and his all his power. He wants to pass it to these two, and his two grandsons die within 16 months of each other at 21 years and 23 years old. And this sends Augustus into a tailspin. And he reluctantly, as he can see his time coming to an end, he forces Tiberius, who is his son-in-law and an estranged son-in-law, to be adopted. And so Tiberius is recalled to Rome. He is adopted, and then he becomes emperor when Augustus dies in 14 AD. And so two really conspicuous adoptions that show how imperial succession was negotiated. And part of that, not to be discounted, is the religious aspect. If Rome had been so well cared for by the Caesari family spirit, then the Genius Augusti, the Genius of Augustus, would have to pass to Tiberius. Caligula was not adopted. He came to power through or rather ordinary means, as did Claudius. But the reason Claudius came into power was because he was the last living relative of Augustus, and therefore, if he was the last living relative, it was assumed that those spirits would once again, give blessing to the Roman Empire. Caligula was a train wreck. There is a recent publication by James Crossley, which I have not gotten my hands on, that argues the Gospel of Mark is really reaction to the despotic Caligula. And that would be in the late 30s, early 40s AD, which is very early as far as we could tell from Mark's Gospel. But it creates a rather interesting theory. Claudius, he is a strange one. Claudius probably had some sort of genetic problem, whether it was palsy, some sort of palsy, or as some people conjecture, I've often thought that maybe it had to do with epilepsy, the kind of symptoms that are described. But he comes across just as a complete buffoon. Yet he compiled a rather wordy history of Rome. It ranged some 30-some volumes, and here's how you know that something about Claudius was a little bit off. As an historian, he wrote all those books on the history of Rome. Do you know not one page survives? That's an interesting set of circumstances. In any event, Claudius, as we learned from looking at the chapter 7 and Messalina, Claudius was not the sharpest spoon in the drawer, and he has his own natural children. Britannicus, Germanicus are two of his children, and the one dies and the other dies rather suspiciously. But before these die, his wife Agrippina, she decides to have him adopt her little boy Nero Drusus. Now Nero was a young person, like 10 or 11 or 12, but at age 17, Agrippina, this is the way Suetonius will tell the story, Agrippina feeds him the mushrooms, and Claudius dies. And Nero ascends to power as a very young person, I think 17 years old, in 56 AD. And sometimes when I speak dates, sometimes those dates are a little off. I'm trying to just riff it rather than, so if I'm off, I think 56, could be 55, but I think it's 56. Nero he comes to power, and Nero is a disaster as well, but this also comes as an adoption, and so Nero inherits all of Claudius's power and his family spirit. You can look up the picture of a Roman coin with Nero on it, and it perfectly images what I'm trying to suggest. Let me show it to you. So before I show you the coin, I thought I would also show you this famous statue of Caesar Augustus with the little interesting baby figure down here. I don't know if you can see that. Well, it's not going to let me magnify it. I don't suppose. But this is another image of the Genius, and this his armor, his body armor. Really, if you zoom in on that, it takes you to some images of his conquest. And here he's always pointing forward. Augustus's mantra was "Make haste slowly," kind of perfectly imaged here. So this is a picture of a Roman coin, and this is Nero and his mother. Here is Neronis, Caesarus, Matera, that is Neronis, the mother, Nero, Caesar's mother, Agrippina, and this Claudius is right here. Notice the D-I-V-I, which means God, the divine Claudius. And so on the obverse of the coin, notice here you have the laurel. This is the signature for the senatorial mint, and how this is his full name and title. And look at how much stuff that has to be put on here. So Germanicus would have been his father, Imperator. Nero Claudius, Divi F. You see this Divi F? That is Son of God. This is comes after Augustus's decision. If Julius got run through with a spear because he kept calling himself or pretending he was a god, see, Augustus didn't make the same mistake. He called himself the son of a god. The deification of Roman emperors is a study all on its own. But the theosis of the emperor, that is his deification, was supposed to be cemented at his death when they burned the corpse. If they did practice the burning, or if they had a burning in effigy, which they did sometimes, then when the smoke was rising at just the right time, someone would let an eagle fly. And that eagle flying up would have been the instant moment where the emperor would have been deified. And so Claudius takes on the same characteristics, the son of of Caesar Augustus. And so you get this idea. You get that idea. Here's Nero. And you may know the Colosseum in Rome was it was named the Colosseum not because of the Colosseum's ginormity. That's not a word. But because the Colossus of Nero, the giant gold statue of Nero, stood as the Colossus. That's what they called it. And so the Colosseum was in the range of the Colossus of Nero. The only thing that remains of that is the pediment where the foot had been. And it's huge. And those of you who have visited the Colosseum, as much as I'm filled with jealousy, will know what I'm speaking about, perhaps, if you've visited the Roman Colosseum. So this gives you a couple of little windows into the notions of the Genius, the Roman Genius, and how it works. This Divi Filius is a testimony to the significance of it. And so Paul has this in mind when he talks about the spirit of adoption. Now, when we go to the next study, we're going to look at Romans 9 through 11 and try to see how this ends up. Make a comment if you can.